Over the years, I've tried to get into several game series and have been met with the hard truth that maybe, just maybe, it's not for me. A lot of different aspects come together to make a series what it is, and sometimes it just doesn't mix well for me, which is completely fine. Just one of the many series that would fall under this umbrella for me would be the Legend of Zelda games, which I've played a fair few of, and they're just not for me, but there is one exception to that, being the Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. I never did get around to finishing the original version, but I've always enjoyed the handheld Zelda games a lot more than the console titles. And with the release of the Link's Awakening remake in 2019, I eventually decided I would finally get around to finishing the game. Eventually, as in about 3 years after it came out. Yeah, I'm late to this, what of it? This one definitely holds a special place in my heart, as I played it quite a bit when I was younger, so I was intrigued to see if I'd still look back at this game as fondly as I did whenever I first played it. The game follows Link's adventure on Koholint Island, which he mysteriously finds himself stranded upon at the beginning of the game, being found by a local named Marin who takes him back to her house. After Link wakes up, we're let loose and allowed to explore to our heart's content. And that's the first thing I'd like to talk about, because I found myself getting lost at every turn in this game, whether it be the next area I'm meant to explore or a specific item I need to defeat a mini-boss. Sometimes though I was just missing an item needed to cross over a gap or a body of water, which was definitely what caused me to circle around the map like a chicken running around with its head cut off. Despite that though, I think some of the most fun I had with the game was just exploring and seeing what each area had to offer. There's a lot of fun extra stuff here on top of the required story content. Like, I particularly enjoyed a few of the mini-games here, despite some of them having some really frustrating elements. The Crane Games prizes in particular have actual physics now, and oh my gosh, stop sliding out of the crane, Yoshi! Seriously though, this crane game probably took 20 years off of my life. Let's not forget the trading side quest, which takes you across the entirety of Koholint, where you meet most of the game's weird cast of characters. While I didn't find myself attached to any of the characters, I really like this side quest since it helps you get to know just about everyone on the island and make you feel just slightly closer to everyone. It's definitely no secret though that the game tries to make you care for Marin more, since she gets the most screen time out of any other side character. Link and Marin sort of have a close friendship that builds up throughout the game, but it never culminates to anything of note since, well, the game is a dream. Hey, sorry for the spoiler, but the game is not subtle in the slightest about Koholint being a figment of Link's imagination. So you can throw as much emotional baggage on me as you want, Marin. You're not real, so it doesn't affect me. You really think you can get me to cry whenever the game looks as cute as it does? Oh, and yeah, talk about a glow-up. The Game Boy Color version certainly did a great job of the hardware, but the Switch version is just gorgeous. It is so good looking. Like, honestly, it is up there with Luigi's Mansion 3 in terms of quality. And honestly, I can't think of any other way to adapt Link's Awakening to 3D, as this just feels like the most faithful to the original that you could get, and ever since that initial trailer came out, I just thought it was super fitting given the game is just a dream and all. Speaking of, the remake is super faithful in general. There weren't very many major changes other than the addition of the Chamber Dungeons mode. Essentially, this mode allows you to kind of design your own Zelda dungeons, but in the most basic form you could imagine. It's a cool concept, but in execution it's really boring, and I hardly tampered with it simply because you're only allowed to slot specific pre-built rooms together. You can't actually design your own rooms or puzzles, which honestly just makes me wonder what the point was other than adding in some more completionist incentive. It's a fairly harmless addition, but mostly pointless given how limited it is. I am hoping this means Nintendo was open to the idea of a full-on Zelda Dungeon Maker game though, and maybe one day, considering this was released 3 years ago and still no news. Another pretty big change came with the updated soundtrack, which was honestly such a treat to hear. The Game Boy version has some solid tracks for the hardware, but the new tracks produce this almost orchestral sound that I absolutely adored. The overworld themes for the prairie and Tall Tall Heights are songs you hear a lot throughout your adventure, but I never found myself growing tired of them. Rather, I just loved hearing them start up again. But the Ballad of the Windfish was easily my favorite track. The composing team did a tremendous job on this one. Of course, a special mention has to go out to the sound design for Link's pitter-pattering. That was just genius. Moving on from the remake content though, it's surprising just how well the design for Link's Awakening holds up after all of these years. Most Game Boy games don't tend to offer up much replay value for me, but I can easily see myself replaying Link's Awakening because overall I never found myself disliking any one part of the game. I don't think it'll blow your mind or anything, but the game does quite a lot with what content it has, with the dungeons in particular being the real highlights of the game. Despite the game's simplistic nature, they each offer up some really fun puzzles that do make you think quite a bit at times, but it rarely gets to the point of complete frustration. I always found myself super satisfied whenever I finally figured out what to do or where to go in a dungeon. It makes for a really nice contrast to the usual Zelda dungeon affair. I really enjoyed all of the dungeons, although Eagle's Tower hurt my brain quite a bit with its usage of the Switch platforms and its multi-level structure. It's definitely a unique concept, but I enjoyed the other dungeons a bit more because of that. My brain is just not wired for that sort of thing. The bosses unfortunately aren't all as good as the dungeons themselves. The anglerfish, the hookshot worm thing, definitely some interesting ideas here, but not all of them work very well. A lot of the satisfying design I talked about with regards to the dungeons applies to the overworld in general, since like I've already said, I loved exploring Koholint. It felt nice to have this smaller but still decent sized island to explore. It kind of gave me this Metroidvania kind of feeling whenever I got new items like the hookshot or the flippers that allowed me to cross over to new areas. I think this game helped show me the importance of the phrase less is more, because while it is a simple game compared to most other Zelda titles, it's still really solid and truly a great entry point for any newcomers to the series. If I did have one complaint though, there were a few specific puzzles and bosses that I couldn't get a grasp of, like I think they were too cryptic, more specifically that chess puzzle, you know the one. I felt like I was slowly going insane throwing the same chess piece at the wall 500 times in a row. Send help. And there were some specific bosses like the 8th Dungeons boss that expects you to literally fight fire with fire. Like, I know it's a dream, but I'm still allowed to find that stupid. There were a couple of other instances where the game expects you to attack a boss with a certain item or by dashing at them, and I really feel like they could have done a much better job at telegraphing this. Otherwise though, Link's Awakening was and still is a great Zelda game. I had a blast with this one from start to finish, and I would love to see more top-down Zelda games in this kind of style. In particular, it'd be super cool to see a remake of Oracle of Ages and Seasons in the Link's Awakening remake style. I hardly ever see anyone talk about those games, so I think it'd be a great way to reintroduce them as a little bonus game before the next big Zelda title, whether that's Breath of the Wild 2 or whatever else Nintendo has cooking up. Whatever the case, I'm Wyrlwind, thank you so much for watching. As always, consider liking, subscribing, and all that good stuff if you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Later!